The cabin lights fell into a low amber glow, that soft, humming kind airplanes use to convince you everything will be calm. I remember thinking this flight would be routine, a simple cross-country trip with my sister, nothing more than a seat, a sky, and a quiet landing. But the moment I looked around row 14, I felt something tightening in the air. A tension humming beneath the pleasant drone of the engines. I didn't know it was the kind of tension that ends with police stepping into the cabin. I didn't know it would begin with a blanket. Before we go any further, comment below where are you watching from right now. I was in 14B. Amy, my sister, took the window seat. Her red weighted blanket sat folded in her lap, waiting to be the shield it always is for her when the sky starts to move, and her anxiety claws at her chest. She touched the blanket softly, her fingers trembling the way they do when she's trying to keep herself steady on a flight that already feels too loud. That blanket is her anchor, her safe place, her one guaranteed piece of peace when her mind is spinning, and I guard it the way a soldier guards the last line of defense. But that's not even the half of it. I looked at Amy breathing slow into her palms, grounding herself, and I thought we were fine. I thought the worst thing we would face was turbulence. But that's not even the half of it. I looked at Amy breathing slow into her palms, grounding herself, and I thought we were fine. I thought the worst thing we would face was turbulence. And then I heard her. A crackling voice slicing through boarding calls and baby cries. "No, Brenda," I said, "artisan. Are you incapable of listening?" A woman 3 spots behind us barked into her phone like she was auditioning to become the CEO of Entitlement Incorporated. Beige outfit, assault-grade perfume, a haircut sharp enough to slash through the But that's not even the half of it. I looked at Amy breathing slow into her palms, grounding herself, and I thought we were fine. I thought the worst thing we would face was turbulence. But that's not even the half of it. I looked at Amy breathing slow into her palms, grounding herself, and I thought we were fine. I thought the worst thing we would face was turbulence. And then I heard her. A crackling voice slicing through boarding calls and baby cries. "No, Brenda," I said, "artisan. Are you incapable of listening?" A woman 3 spots behind us barked into her phone like she was auditioning to become the CEO of Entitlement Incorporated. Beige outfit, assault-grade perfume, a haircut sharp enough to slash through the And then I heard her. A crackling voice slicing through boarding calls and baby cries. "No, Brenda," I said, "artisan. Are you incapable of listening?" A woman 3 spots behind us barked into her phone like she was auditioning to become the CEO of Entitlement Incorporated. Beige outfit, assault-grade perfume, a haircut sharp enough to slash through the looked like a friendly professor, tried offering kindness. "Ma'am," he said nicely, "if you turn your suitcase upright, there will be room for everyone." She didn't look at him. She didn't consider him. She simply declared, "It fits better this way." Her tone was firm, the tone of someone who believed courtesy was a disease. "It protects the contents," she added, as if that explained suffocating the space meant for 3 other passengers. The professor blinked once, nodded politely, and quietly relocated his own bag several rows back. "So does the airplane," he whispered to himself, but loud enough for me to hear. I slid our bags into a distant bin, guiding Amy into her seat. The rumble of the engines vibrated faintly through the floor. For a split second, everything was almost serene. Amy pulled the blanket across her lap, red, warm, weighted. It spilled gently over her legs, settling with that soft heaviness that helps her breathe evenly. Her shoulders released the tension clinging to them. She looked safe. She looked grounded. It was the only moment of calm she would get. Because then Karen dropped into 14C like a boulder crashing into the aisle. The entire row shifted from the impact of her presence. She didn't say hello, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge shared space. She simply leaned across me with an invasive confidence that made the hairs on my neck stand up. And then she saw the blanket. For a split second, everything was almost serene. Amy pulled the blanket across her lap, red, warm, weighted. It spilled gently over her legs, settling with that soft heaviness that helps her breathe evenly. Her shoulders released the tension clinging to them. She looked safe. She looked grounded. It was the only moment of calm she would get. Too vulnerable. And this woman was the kind who smelled vulnerability the way sharks smell blood. I turned toward her with a calm, neutral expression that took effort to maintain. "It's a weighted blanket," I said. "It helps with anxiety." She scoffed. Actually scoffed, like she'd been personally offended by the concept of mental health. "Don't be ridiculous," she said. "That's clearly airline property. It matches their accents." It didn't, at all. Not in color, texture, weight, or design. But entitlement doesn't care about facts. Entitlement cares about possession. She snapped her fingers dismissively. First-class passengers get those blankets. She shouldn't have it. I blinked once, my patience thinning. "Ma'am, it's a personal item, like your purse." That was the moment she crossed the line. Her arm moved across my lap, her fingers extended, and she reached for it. She reached for Amy's blanket like she was plucking an item off a clearance rack. Amy recoiled so sharply her shoulder hit the window, and something inside me snapped. My hand shot up and blocked Karen's wrist mid-reach. "Do not touch my sister," I said. Not loud, not angry, just firm enough to freeze the air. She stared at me as if no one had ever told her no in her life. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes narrowed. She opened her mouth to argue, but another voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Is there a problem here?" We turned. A flight attendant stood in the aisle, posture perfect, gaze steady, authority wrapped in calm composure. Her name tag read Maya Brooks, and Maya didn't miss a thing. Her eyes swept the row, collecting every detail, every breath, every sign of conflict. She had shown up at the exact second the situation needed a referee. She looked. Amy recoiled so sharply her shoulder hit the window, and something inside me snapped. My hand shot up and blocked Karen's wrist mid-reach. "Do not touch my sister," I said. Not loud, not angry, just firm enough to freeze the air. She stared at me as if no one had ever told her no in her life. Her jaw clenched. Announced loudly, "I need it, I'm cold." Maya blinked once, slowly. "Our blankets are blue," she said. "Thin, wrapped in plastic. That one isn't ours." Karen's face twitched. And Maya wasn't done. She turned to Amy. "You're good, sweetheart." That one sentence destroyed every ounce of power Karen thought she had over the situation. She folded her arms, seething, and stared at the window like she could burn a hole through it. But this wasn't the end. It wasn't even the beginning of the end. This was the spark, the ignition. The silent warning in Maya's eyes told me that she knew it too. Karen wasn't finished. She was only regrouping, and the real disaster hadn't even started yet. The moment Maya stepped away, the hum of the engines felt louder, like the plane itself knew something ugly was forming. Karen sat rigid in 14C, arms crossed, jaw locked, breathing sharp and clipped. But the real storm was happening behind her eyes. I'd seen that expression before in people who couldn't stand being challenged. It was the look of someone who believed the world owed them obedience and was shocked to discover they were wrong. And I could feel her rage building, not loud, not theatrical yet, but simmering under the surface like a pot about to boil over. Amy leaned into the window again, her blanket pulled tight across her chest, trying to return to the safe bubble she had before Karen invaded her space. I could see how shaken she still was. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the edge of the blanket. That small tremor lit a fuse inside me, a fuse made of memory and responsibility and every promise I'd ever made to protect her. People think anxiety is loud, dramatic, frantic. They don't understand the quiet kind, the kind Amy has, the kind that sits on your ribcage and presses down until breathing becomes work. She's carried that since childhood, and she's fought it with more discipline than most soldiers bring to combat. That blanket wasn't some accessory. It was a lifeline, a medical tool, a safety net she built into her world because the world didn't care enough to be gentle with her. Karen didn't know that. Karen wouldn't have cared even if she did. But I knew. I knew every piece of Amy's story, including the parts that shaped the calm voice I used when her panic felt like a rising tide. People always assume I'm naturally unshakable. They think I'm calm because nothing gets to me. They're wrong. I'm calm because of where I come from. My father was Air Force. Logistics, operations, discipline baked into his bones. Growing up with him was like living inside a playbook of structure. You didn't raise your voice unless it mattered. You didn't escalate unless someone's safety was on the line. You learned to think 5 moves ahead, not 1. Rules weren't about control. They were about preventing chaos. My mother was the opposite kind of authority. ER nurse. Fast hands, sharp eyes, calm in crisis, but fierce when protecting the vulnerable. She was the kind of woman who could stitch a wound while giving life advice and ordering a doctor to move faster. She taught me the difference between panic and urgency. She taught me how to speak to someone who's scared. She taught me how to soften my voice without losing strength. Amy inherited her anxiety from neither of them, yet both of them spent years helping her build strategies. They taught her grounding exercises, breathing patterns. The weighted blanket came later, prescribed by her therapist, recommended by medical professionals, researched by our family like it was a tactical device. It became her anchor. And the moment Karen reached for it, she wasn't reaching for fabric. She was reaching for stability, for peace, for something Amy used to keep her world intact. And there are very few things I will go to war over. My sister is one of them. Karen didn't know any of this as she sat beside me, plotting her next move. But she didn't need to. I could feel her studying me, measuring me, trying to decide whether I was someone she could steamroll or whether she needed a new angle. Entitled people follow predictable patterns. They escalate when challenged, they lash out when embarrassed. And Karen had been humiliated, first by me blocking her grab, then by Maya publicly shutting her down. She was stewing, waiting for her chance to take back control. Amy curled deeper into her seat, but she kept glancing at me. I could read the question in her eyes. Are we safe? I nodded once. She trusted that. She always has. But I wasn't trusting anything. I was watching Karen like a fuse that hadn't reached the dynamite yet. There's something people don't understand about airplanes. They think everyone inside a cabin is equal. That's not true. An aircraft is a hierarchy in a metal tube. The captain holds final authority like a judge presiding over his own airborne courtroom. Flight attendants are not waiters. They're trained responders with legal powers granted by the FAA. Passengers have obligations under federal law, not suggestions. And when someone starts to escalate, everyone trained to manage those situations can feel the shift. I could feel it. Maya definitely could. And Karen? She didn't understand that the moment she tried to grab the blanket, she triggered a chain reaction she would not be able to stop. When I say I'd seen people like her before, I don't mean in passing. I mean I've studied their patterns. Conflict de-escalation was part of my training and emergency response courses I took years ago. I've worked with people in crisis. I've talked down screaming parents in emergency rooms, restrained violent patients during adrenaline spikes, and handled situations where one wrong sentence could set off a chain reaction. And everything about Karen, the rigidity of her posture, the sharpness of her breath, the thinly controlled tremble in her fingers, told me she was not calming down. She was coiling, winding, preparing. People like her don't accept no. They treat boundaries like personal insults, and when they're embarrassed, they retaliate. That's why I kept my voice even, why I didn't rise to her bait, why I moved Amy to my left between me and the window and took the middle seat myself. I wasn't avoiding conflict. I was controlling the battlefield. Because once Karen escalated again, and she would, I wanted to be the one absorbing it, not Amy. I wanted to be the line she had to get through. And she didn't yet understand the difference between someone who avoids confrontation and someone who is prepared for it. Maya walked past again, giving me a look that said she was monitoring everything. I nodded subtly. She understood. Karen saw that. And entitlement mixed with embarrassment can ignite into rage fast. I could feel her offense radiating like heat from asphalt. She glanced at the blanket again, then at Amy, then back at me. Her silence wasn't peace. It was an omen. Amy whispered, "I'm okay," like she was trying to convince herself. I leaned in. "You're safe. I've got you." And I meant it. I've protected her since we were kids, when she was bullied for freezing during presentations, when her panic attacks kept her out of summer camps, when she couldn't ride elevators without shaking. She's fought her battles quietly, so when someone as loud and abrasive as Karen targets her, my patience evaporates. My father used to say calm is a weapon, and I've carried that with me. But he also said something else. Calm doesn't mean passive. Calm means controlled. And that was exactly what I was in row 14. Controlled, ready, focused. Karen shifted in her seat, muttering under her breath. Too low for words to form, but loud enough to be threatening. She glanced down the aisle, then at the call button, then at the blanket again. She was planning. That was clear. You don't need words to read someone who's about to act out. Their entire body telegraphs it. The stiffness, the narrowed eyes, the clipped breaths. And if you've been trained to recognize those signals, they're as clear as neon signs. People assume cabin tension happens quickly. Sometimes it does, but most times it's slow. It builds. It gathers pressure like a thunderstorm waiting for the right moment to strike. And Karen was the cloud forming above us, getting darker by the minute. She wasn't done. She wasn't close to done. And the sick thing was, she believed she was the victim already. That's the dangerous kind of entitlement. The kind that justifies violence before it even happens. The kind that makes people think their discomfort is more important than someone else's dignity. Maya passed us one more time, lightly touching my seat as she walked. A secret signal. A silent message. I see it. I'm here. Stay steady. I knew this wasn't just about the blanket anymore. It wasn't even about Amy anymore. This was about power. Karen wanted control of the row, control of the narrative, control of the environment. And when she didn't get it, she shifted to retaliation. I could feel it coming the way you can feel static before lightning. Her breathing changed. Her jaw reset. Her fingers twitched as she reached for her cup of water. And in that moment, Every instinct in me said the same thing my father used to say before a storm hit. Brace yourself. Guy, because Karen wasn't finished with us. And the next move she made would detonate everything. The turbulence hadn't started yet, but the energy in row 14 already felt unstable, like the cabin walls were holding their breath. The truth about airplanes is simple. When the door closes, the outside world doesn't matter. Inside that metal tube is a hierarchy so strict that even whispering the wrong thing can shift authority. Most passengers don't think about it, but I do. My father taught me that the sky has rules the ground doesn't. Rules written in consequences measured in lives, not in conveniences. Up here, the captain is the highest authority. Not a suggestion, not symbolic, literal command. Beneath him, the flight attendants operate with delegated power enforced by federal regulation. They are not customer service employees. They're emergency responders, trained to make decisions that override passengers entirely. And the rest of us? We're required, legally, not politely, to comply. But Karen didn't believe in compliance. She believed in dominance. She believed volume could replace authority. She believed entitlement could defeat protocol. She believed she could bend every rule around her. Watching her fold her arms, seethe, huff, and glare was watching someone mentally rewrite the chain of command to place herself at the top. The only problem was that she wasn't dealing with someone like her. She was dealing with me, and she was dealing with Maya. People had begun settling in around us, and the usual boarding chaos was dying down. The man in the tweed jacket, Mr. Pike, opened a history book, but I saw him glance over his glasses every few seconds. Observant, sharp, a witness without trying to be one. Behind us sat Ben Ford, the retired Army Master Sergeant who had that unmistakable quiet vigilance soldiers carry long after they've left service. He hadn't said a word yet, but his presence was a steady hum of readiness. Karen had no idea she'd put herself in a row surrounded by people with discipline in their blood. The irony was almost funny. But the real shift happened when the flight attendants began moving through the aisle. Their authority isn't loud, it's subtle, in the way they check buckles, and how their eyes scan dozens of faces in seconds, and how they read tension before anyone else does. I noticed the moment Maya changed posture. Her shoulders tightened just slightly, her stride sharpened, her eyes lingered on Karen for half a second longer. That's all I needed to see. She was preparing. She knew what I knew. Karen wasn't done, and she wasn't going to calm down on her own. Airplanes amplify behavior. A whisper sounds louder, a sigh sounds heavier, a laugh carries further. But entitlement? Entitlement becomes explosive. Karen's presence was already radiating through the cabin. Every flared nostril, every exaggerated arm cross, every scoff was a spark in a cramped space containing 100 people trying to mind their business. People began sensing something was off. The aisle 2 rows behind us went quieter. The mother across from us shifted her toddler away from Karen's reach. Even the teenage boy filming earlier kept his camera angled just slightly, waiting. Karen had become a live wire, and everyone around her could feel the current. Amy focused on her breathing, the blanket tucked under her chin, her fingers pressing lightly into its weight. It always helped her, grounding her with steady pressure. But now her eyes flicked nervously between me and Karen, reading every shift, every sigh. Her anxiety thrived in unpredictability, and Karen was nothing if not unpredictable. I adjusted my posture, shoulders squared, legs planted, making myself an unmistakable barrier. She wasn't getting near Amy again, not while I had a pulse. The thing about people like Karen is that their entitlement is layered. It starts with minor infractions, cutting a boarding line, hogging overhead space. Then it grows into claims, thinking a blanket is airline property simply because she wants it. Then it becomes invasion, reaching across another person's body to take something that doesn't belong to her. And eventually, it becomes aggression. It was never going to stop with her snatching. People like her escalate until something stops them. I just didn't expect her next escalation would be so calculated. The engines roared louder as the plane accelerated into the sky. The vibration under our feet deepened. Amy gripped my arm once. I squeezed her hand gently until the wheels lifted. The moment we reached cruising altitude, Karen shifted. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Amy. She stared at the blanket like it was a stolen prize. Her jaw pulsed. She inhaled sharply. Her fingers twitched. I watched her in my peripheral vision, noting every detail the way my training taught me to. The set of her shoulders, the erratic breaths, the tension in her neck. She wasn't calming. She was preparing. And that's when the hierarchy truly revealed itself. The flight attendants began securing the cabin for meal service. The drink cart rolled toward us with its subtle metallic rattle. Maya was on point. Her eyes swept our row again, catching Karen's posture instantly. She slowed, not enough to draw attention, but enough to confirm what she suspected. Enough to send a message that she was ready. People forget flight attendants are trained in conflict identification. They read passengers the way detectives read suspects. And Karen was giving off enough signals to raise alarms in 3 airports. Maya passed behind us, tapped the back of my seat once, a coded gesture I recognized from watching crisis-trained staff before. A silent message. Stay steady. I'm watching. Karen noticed. And entitlement mixed with humiliation is a deadly combination. Her nostrils flared. Her lips tightened into a razor-thin line. She looked at me with simmering fury, as if daring me to challenge her again. She wasn't going to let the earlier confrontation go. She wasn't going to accept that someone told her no. She wasn't going to let a flight attendant, someone she believed beneath her, shut her down. She needed a victory. These people always do. And the blanket, Amy's blanket, was still her chosen battlefield. Amy shifted slightly under it, adjusting the weight, unaware that Karen was studying every movement like a predator tracking an opening. Amy's vulnerability wasn't something she flaunted. It was something she carefully, quietly managed with the tools she'd spent years practicing. But to Karen, it was an invitation, and I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't done. She wasn't backing down. She was escalating. Airplanes have an unspoken social structure, too. People tend to maintain artificial politeness. They don't want conflict. They endure rude passengers instead of confronting them. They turn away when someone is obnoxious rather than intervene. And Karen relied on that. She depended on silence. She used social pressure as a weapon, knowing most people don't want to cause a scene. But she miscalculated row 14. She miscalculated me. And she miscalculated the fact that people were already watching. A man 2 rows up was pretending to scroll on his phone, but the camera lens was angled just slightly in our direction. The teenager from earlier had his AirPods in and his phone resting on his tray, angled perfectly. Mr. Pike's book was open, but he was absorbing every detail. Ben behind me had shifted into that alert, ready posture military men fall into without thinking. Even the elderly woman across the aisle had her hand resting protectively on her handbag, watching Karen like she'd seen this type before too many times. Karen, in her blinding arrogance, hadn't realized she'd walked into a row of people who had no intention of letting her rewrite reality. People who would later become the witnesses that destroyed every lie she tried to tell. And still, she pushed forward. Her breathing sharpened. Her eyes narrowed. She reached for her cup of water and held it in a way I instantly recognized as deliberate. A way that said she was planning something messy. Something she could blame on turbulence. Something she could use as justification for whatever came next. And in that moment, I felt the shift so clearly that my father's voice echoed in my memory. Control the field. Stay ahead of the next move. Karen wasn't unpredictable. Not to someone who understood escalation patterns. Not to someone trained to read adrenaline-based behavior and conflict cues. She was predictable in the most dangerous way. She was preparing a retaliation disguised as an accident. I angled my body slightly. I watched her hands. I watched the muscles in her wrist. I watched the way she tested the cup's weight. And I knew exactly what was coming. She was going to create chaos, then weaponize victimhood. It was the oldest tactic in the manipulator's playbook. And the moment she acted, the entire structure of authority on that plane would snap into place. Flight attendants, captain, federal law, witnesses, cameras, everything would converge. The hierarchy was about to come down on her so hard it would flatten the castle she built out of her entitlement. But she didn't realize that yet. She still believed she was untouchable. She still believed the sky bent for her. She still believed she could take anything she wanted, including a blanket that wasn't hers. The turbulence hadn't hit yet, but it was about to, and not the kind caused by weather, the kind caused by consequences. I felt the first shift in the cabin before the plane even trembled. It wasn't turbulence, it was something far smaller, far more intentional, the faintest motion of Karen's wrist as she lifted her cup. Not high, not dramatically, just enough for me to see the glint of water sloshing against the thin plastic. The air around us tightened, the way a room feels right before a glass shatters. People think explosions happen suddenly. They don't. They build in tiny increments until one movement pushes everything past the point of no return. That movement was Karen's wrist tilting outward instead of inward. The world slowed. I could see the trajectory forming, the water preparing to fly, the vindictive calculation in her eyes. She waited for the smallest sway of the aircraft, the subtle tilt that comes naturally during leveling. She wanted plausible deniability. She wanted a cover story before the act even happened. And she thought nobody would notice. She thought nobody would care. She thought her lie would land before the truth did. She was wrong. The plane dipped half an inch, barely a whisper against the engines, and she pounced on it. Her arm jerked, exaggerated, pretending to be pulled by the tilt. She wanted a cover story before the act even happened. And she thought nobody would notice. She thought nobody would care. She thought her lie would land before the truth did. She was wrong. The plane dipped half an inch, barely a whisper against the engines, and she pounced on it. Her arm jerked, exaggerated, pretending to be pulled by the tilt. The water flew in a cold arc that hit my arm and splashed onto the edge of Amy's blanket. I felt the shock of cold more sharply because I understood exactly what had happened. Karen gasped dramatically, one hand flying to her chest like she'd witnessed a crime instead of committing one. Oh my goodness! The water flew in a cold arc that hit my arm and splashed onto the edge of Amy's blanket. I felt the shock of cold more sharply because I understood exactly what had happened. Karen gasped dramatically, one hand flying to her chest like she'd witnessed a crime instead of committing one. Oh my goodness! The turbulence! She exclaimed, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Amy startled awake, her eyes wide, her fingers clutching her blanket protectively. And Karen, in the most insulting move of all, reached across my lap with her useless napkin as if she were doing me a favor. "Here, let me help you." My arm blocked hers before she could touch either of us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lash out. I just said, "Don't." One word. Controlled. Precise. Final. Karen's eyes flashed like I'd slapped her. She recoiled dramatically, her mouth dropping open in fabricated shock. "How dare you talk to me like that?" she snapped, loud enough for every row near us to hear. "The turbulence," she exclaimed, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. Amy startled awake, her eyes wide, her fingers clutching her blanket protectively. And Karen, in the most insulting move of all, reached across my lap with her useless napkin as if she were doing me a favor. "Here, let me help you." My arm blocked hers before she could touch either of us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lash out. I just said, "Don't." One word. Controlled. Precise. Final. Karen's eyes flashed like I'd slapped her. She recoiled dramatically, her mouth dropping open in fabricated shock. "How dare you talk to me like that?" she snapped, loud enough for every row near us to hear. And just like that, the second phase of her plan unfolded. The fake accident had been only the prelude. The real attack was the narrative she was now constructing. And just like that, the second phase of her plan unfolded. The fake accident had been only the prelude. The real attack was the narrative she was now constructing. "If he hadn't made me squeeze into this seat, the water wouldn't have spilled," she announced to no one, and everyone at the same time. "That blanket is completely unsanitary now. If he hadn't made me squeeze into this seat, the water wouldn't have spilled," she announced to no one, and everyone at the same time. "That blanket is completely unsanitary now." Of us. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lash out. I just said, "Don't." One word. Controlled. Precise. Final. Karen's eyes flashed like I'd slapped her. She recoiled dramatically, her mouth dropping open in fabricated shock. "How dare you talk to me like that?" she snapped, loud enough for every row near us to hear. And just like that, the second phase of her plan unfolded. The fake accident had been only the prelude. The real attack was the narrative she was now constructing. "If he hadn't made me squeeze into this seat, the water wouldn't have spilled," she announced to no one, and everyone at the same time. "That blanket is completely unsanitary now." "Sir, are you okay?" I nodded. My shirt was damp, uncomfortable, cold, but I wasn't hurt. Just angry. Controlled anger. Weaponized calm. The same tone my father used when grounding me with military precision. The same calm that people mistake for softness until they realize it's armor. "She threw the water deliberately," I said quietly. "Not emotionally, not dramatically, just factually." And that's when Karen snapped. The performance dropped. The mask slipped. She lunged. Not a gentle reach this time, not a subtle attempt. A full-body lunge across me, fingers clawing for Amy's blanket like she had a right to it. Like she could take it if she just moved fast enough. Her arm shot out, aiming for the soft red fabric, and instinct moved faster than thought. I blocked her with my forearm, my voice breaking through her chaos. "No." It wasn't loud. It was final. But Karen didn't retreat. She shoved me. Hard. Hard enough that my shoulder slammed into the seat back with a dull, painful thud. The cabin gasped. An audible wave. Mr. Pike rose halfway out of his seat. Ben's chair creaked from the force of him leaning forward, and Karen froze, her hand still extended, fully aware of what she'd just done. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was physical assault in the air. And this time there were witnesses. Maya's voice dropped into a tone I'd only ever heard from trauma professionals. "Ma'am," she said, "sit back, now." But Karen, fueled by humiliation, rage, and entitlement, pressed the call button 3 times in rapid succession, her finger stabbing the plastic violently. The chimes echoed through the cabin like alarms. And the worst part? She still believed she could win. She believed she could control the narrative. She believed she could convince people she was the victim. But the evidence told a different story. Phones recording, witnesses watching, statements forming silently in the minds of passengers, and the laws of an aircraft tightening around her like invisible restraints. Maya reached into her apron, pulled out a small clipboard, and flipped to a specific page. A page I recognized from my father's airline manual. A formal misconduct notice. A document that goes straight to the captain. A document that becomes part of an FAA report. A document that exists only when a passenger threatens safety. She clicked her pen. That click cut through the air like a verdict. I am documenting a written incident, Maya announced quietly, professionally. The captain has been notified. Karen's face lost all its color. You can't do that, she breathed. You can't. I already have, Maya said. The plane hummed beneath us, engines steady, passengers silent. And in that moment, the structure of authority in the sky revealed itself. Karen wasn't in control. Maya was. The captain was. Federal law was. And Karen, for the first time in her life, was about to meet a system she couldn't manipulate. But that's where everything blew apart. Maya stepped away to retrieve more towels. Karen saw her chance. The tiniest sliver of opportunity in the brief moment Maya wasn't watching our row. Her eyes flicked toward the blanket. Her hand tightened into a claw, and she lunged again, faster, harder, reckless. I blocked her, but she shoved me a second time. Harder this time. Enough to snap my head sideways and rattle the seat. Phones flew up. People shouted. A baby cried. And row 14 became a war zone. Karen had crossed the final line, and the consequences were already on their way down the aisle. The cabin didn't explode in noise the way you'd expect. It collapsed into a different kind of silence. Sharp, electric, the kind that happens when 100 people recognize danger at the exact same moment. Karen's shove I blocked her, but she shoved me a second time. Harder this time. Enough to snap my head sideways and rattle the seat. Phones flew up. People shouted. A baby cried. And row 14 became a war zone. Karen had crossed the final line, and the consequences were already on their way down the aisle. The cabin didn't explode in noise the way you'd expect. It collapsed into a different kind of silence. Sharp, electric, the kind that happens when 100 people recognize danger at the exact same moment. Karen's shove still echoed through my bones, the aftershock rattling deeper than the physical hit. Amy gasped behind me, her hands gripping her blanket with a terrified desperation. It collapsed into a different kind of silence. Sharp, electric, the kind that happens when 100 people recognize danger at the exact same moment. Karen's shove still echoed through my bones, the aftershock rattling deeper than the physical hit. Amy gasped behind me, her hands gripping her blanket with a terrified desperation. I blocked her, but she shoved me a second time. Harder this time. Enough to snap my head sideways and rattle the seat. Phones flew up. People shouted. A baby cried. And row 14 became a war zone. Karen had crossed the final line, and the consequences were already on their way down the aisle. The cabin didn't explode in noise the way you'd expect. It collapsed into a different kind of silence. Sharp, electric, the kind that happens when 100 people recognize danger at the exact same moment. Karen's shove still echoed through my bones, the aftershock rattling deeper than the physical hit. Amy gasped behind me, her hands gripping her blanket with a terrified desperation. nature. Karen jerked her hand back, her face contorting into a wounded expression as she tried to gather the remnants of her fake innocence. "He grabbed me!" she shrieked, pointing at me with a shaking, accusatory finger. "He attacked me! You all saw him attack me!" The plane was still humming steadily beneath us, but her words were shaking the air harder than any turbulence could. The accusation wasn't just absurd, it was insulting. A blatant attempt to rewrite reality in front of 24 witnesses. Maya appeared again, like she'd been summoned by the chaos itself. Her stride was fast, her expression tight, her eyes locked onto Karen with crystal clarity. Her training was in full effect now. You could see it in the way she scanned every movement, every angle, every threat. "What is happening?" she asked. But this time her voice was cold, clipped, authoritative. Karen latched onto her like a drowning woman grabbing driftwood. "He shoved me," she cried. "He hit me first. He tried to steal the blanket. I didn't do anything wrong." It was a desperate attempt at survival, fueled by her belief that if she spoke first and louder, people would believe her. But she had chosen the wrong battlefield, and she had chosen the wrong witnesses. "No," Mr. Pike said firmly, stepping into the aisle with his phone raised. "Absolutely not. I have the whole thing recorded." The teenage boy lifted his phone too. "Same here." A woman across the aisle pointed. "She's been harassing them since before takeoff." The tide turned instantly. Karen's face drained of color as the witnesses she expected to manipulate lined up against her one by one. Maya didn't even blink. She didn't need to ask clarifying questions. She didn't need a dramatized retelling. She didn't need permission. Her hand moved toward her apron where her incident forms were clipped. "Ma'am," she said firmly, "you just assaulted another passenger." Karen staggered back like she'd been slapped by the truth. I didn't, you're all lying." "Sit," Maya ordered. The word cracked like a whip. Karen didn't sit. Karen never did the reasonable thing first. Instead, she lunged for the call button again, slamming it repeatedly, her finger clicking the plastic with the force of someone trying to break it. The chimes echoed loudly, 3, 4, 5 times, drawing attention from the entire cabin. "Ma'am," Maya said sharply, "stop pressing the call button." Karen stabbed it again, first and louder. People would believe her. But she had chosen the wrong battlefield, and she had chosen the wrong witnesses. "No," Mr. Pike said firmly, stepping into the aisle with his phone raised. "Absolutely not. I have the whole thing recorded." The teenage boy lifted his phone too. "Same here." A woman across the aisle pointed. "She's been harassing them since before takeoff." The tide turned instantly. Karen's face drained of color as the witnesses she expected to manipulate lined up against her one by one. Maya didn't even blink. She didn't need to ask clarifying questions. She didn't need a dramatized retelling. She didn't need permission. Her hand moved toward her apron where her incident forms were clipped. "Ma'am," she said firmly, "you just assaulted another passenger." Karen staggered back like she'd been slapped by the truth. I didn't, you're all lying." "Sit," Maya ordered. The word cracked like a whip. Karen didn't sit. Karen never did the reasonable thing first. Again, grabbing her purse and climbing halfway out of her seat. "That's not fair!" she screamed. "You're all ganging up on me." Ben moved fast. Not aggressively, but protectively, as Karen's arm flew toward me again. His hand blocked her shoulder with surgical precision. "Ma'am," he said, calm as stone. Stay in your seat. Karen whirled toward him, but the fury in her eyes met something stronger. Not anger, authority. She looked like she was about to argue until she saw the look in his eyes. The same quiet, steady stare soldiers use when they've already measured the threat and decided they're not moving. And then something unexpected happened. Karen tried a new tactic. She switched back into fake fragility so quickly it was almost comical. "I have allergies," she cried. "The polyester in that blanket is making me lightheaded. I need fresh air. I need to move." Maya didn't flinch. "Ma'am," she said, "that blanket is medical-grade cotton, not polyester. And you are not allowed to stand during turbulence." "We're not in turbulence," Karen snapped. "We are," Maya replied coolly. "Sit." Karen sat for a second. But it wasn't compliance. It was coiling. Her arms crossed, her foot tapping violently, her hair shaking with each enraged breath. She simmered with the toxic energy of someone who had never faced consequences and wasn't prepared to start now. She scanned the cabin slowly, her eyes darting from witness to witness, searching desperately for anyone who might validate her story. But every face she saw were people who had watched her unravel. And she could see it. She could feel it. Her audience had turned against her. When Maya stepped away again to speak with another attendant near the galley, Karen began to unravel further. She muttered under her breath. She glared at Amy. She cracked her knuckles. She curled her fingers like she was preparing to strike again. And I knew, without question, that she wasn't done. My instincts kicked into full alert, consequences, and wasn't prepared to start now. She scanned the cabin slowly, her eyes darting from witness to witness, searching desperately for anyone who might validate her story. But every face she saw were people who had watched her unravel. And she could see it. She could feel it. Her audience had turned against her. And threats don't fade away. They escalate. It took less than 30 seconds. Karen's breath hitched, her body tensed, her eyes locked onto the blanket with that same wild hunger. She lunged again, but this time there was no pretense, no "oops, turbulence" excuse, no false apology. It was primal and violent, and that was it. The moment the entire cabin decided she wasn't just disruptive, she was dangerous. I blocked her again, my body absorbing the force of her desperation. That's when everything broke open. Maya arrived at a full sprint, her feet hitting the floor with the urgency of a first responder. She grabbed the back of Karen's seat. "Ma'am," she snapped, "you are done." Karen tried to speak, but Maya didn't give her the chance. Not this time. She turned to the galley phone and pressed a button that no passenger ever wants to be associated with. "Captain," she said, "we have a physically aggressive passenger. Requesting landing protocol." Those words froze the entire aircraft. They were heavy, final. They meant one thing. The captain was taking control. The consequences had entered the cabin. Karen paled visibly, the reality slamming into her with brutal clarity. But she still tried to salvage something. Anything. "I'm the victim," she cried. "I'm being attacked by them, by all of them. You have to do something." Maya turned slowly, her expression carved from steel. "I am," she said. "Please remain seated until authorities board the aircraft." Karen's jaw dropped. "Authorities?" "Law enforcement will meet the plane at the gate," Maya said calmly. "You will disembark first." The plane went dead silent. Karen shook. Actually shook. Her fingers trembled violently, her breath quickening into rapid bursts, her eyes darting as if searching for an escape route in a sealed cabin 35,000 feet above the ground. There was no escape. Not from protocol, not from federal law, not from the witnesses surrounding her. She glared at me one more time, her voice cracking with a mix of rage and despair. "This is your fault." But she was wrong. This wasn't my fault, or Amy's, or Maya's. This was Karen's consequences finally arriving. And the scariest part? The landing hadn't even begun yet. Because the last thing Karen had left, the last move she thought she could make, was the most reckless, dangerous, and desperate move of all. The cabin felt like it was holding its breath as the captain's message settled over us, not spoken aloud yet, but transmitted through Maya's clipped tone. Karen sat rigid in 14C, her fingers trembling against the armrest, her chest rising and falling too fast. But the fury in her eyes didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. She wasn't calming down. She wasn't darting as if searching for an escape route in a sealed cabin 35,000 feet above the ground. There was no escape. Not from protocol, not from federal law. Her imagined facing swallowed her whole. You could see the calculations in her eyes, the frantic desperation, the disbelief that her life had narrowed into a single boxed-in seat with no exit. People like Karen don't process consequences. They try to outrun them. But she wasn't on the ground. There was nowhere to run at 35,000 feet, except deeper into the mess she'd created. Amy sat tucked against the window, her breathing still shaky, her red blanket clutched tightly around her shoulders like it was armor. I placed my arm between her and Karen in a protective barrier, not because Karen would dare try again. She had gone too far already, but because I wasn't going to take chances. Karen had proven herself unpredictable, violent, reckless, and danger doesn't disappear just because consequences are close. Ben behind us remained in that alert, coiled posture, watching Karen the way an experienced soldier watches an unstable threat. His presence alone was a shield. Mr. Pike still held his phone out, recording calmly, quietly, documenting the truth in case Karen attempted another lie or another performance. The witnesses weren't passive now. They were ready. Maya approached again, not walking but moving with deliberate authority. The calm professionalism she had used earlier was gone, replaced with a focused precision that only shows up when protocol becomes law. She crouched beside my seat. "Sir," she said, her voice steady but lower, meant only for me and Amy. "Once we land, please remain seated until officers speak with you. You'll need to give a statement." I nodded. "Of course." She turned her eyes to Amy. They softened instantly. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" Amy shook her head, but her voice wavered. "Just scared." Maya placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "You don't need to be afraid anymore. I promise you that." Her words were quiet, but carried the conviction of someone who knew the weight of responsibility that came with the uniform she wore. This wasn't customer service. This was crisis management. Then, Maya stood and faced Karen. "Ma'am, due to your behavior, the captain has issued an instruction for you to be relocated to the rear of the aircraft for the remainder of the flight." Karen's mouth opened. Her eyes went wide. "No?" One word, sharp, defiant, dangerous. Maya didn't blink. "Ma'am, this is a direct order." "No!" Karen snapped again, louder this time, her foot stamping against the floor like a tantruming child. "I am not moving anywhere. This is my seat. I paid for it." Maya's expression was unreadable, but her voice shifted into the kind of steel that could cut through metal. Defying a direct crew instruction is considered refusal to comply with federal law. If you refuse again, we will divert the flight." The cabin gasped collectively. Karen stared at her, unblinking. She didn't understand. She didn't know that diversions are catastrophic in costs. She didn't know that diverting a plane because of her behavior would make her personally liable for tens of thousands of dollars in fines, sometimes more. But Maya knew, the captain knew, every flight attendant knew this wasn't a threat. It was procedure. Karen's expression wavered. The entitlement didn't disappear. It wobbled under the weight of actual consequences. For a moment I thought she might comply, even if reluctantly. Her fingers trembled as she clutched her oversized beige purse. She stood, slowly, jerky in her movements. But she stood. Maya stepped aside, gesturing toward the back of the plane. "This way." Karen glared at me and Amy with a hatred so raw it felt almost physical. Her voice was a low hiss. "This is all your fault." I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The truth had already buried her lies. She stepped into the aisle, her posture stiff with indignation. And then, just as she prepared to take the first step toward the back, the aircraft chimed. A double tone. The seatbelt sign illuminated overhead. The captain's voice filled the cabin. His tone was calm, but the undertone was firm, decisive, final. "Flight attendants, take your seats. We are beginning our final descent." It was a timing disaster. Karen froze mid-step. Maya stiffened. Ben cursed under his breath. We were landing. Right now. And on descent, no passenger could safely walk down the aisle, not even under escort. Maya looked like she wanted to argue with physics, but rules are rules. "Ma'am," she said reluctantly, "you need to take the nearest seat and buckle in for landing." Karen's lips twisted into a smug, poisonous smile. "Well," she said, "I guess that means I stay here." She sat back down in 14C with an exaggerated flourish, buckling her seatbelt loudly as if declaring victory. The victory was hollow, temporary at best, but she clung to it like it meant something. Maya's jaw tightened. She gave me a look, an apology, a warning, and a promise all in one. Then she hurried away to strap into her jump seat. And that's when the real danger began. Because Karen had been denied everything she wanted: control, power, validation. And now she was trapped inches away from the people who witnessed her unravel. Trapped beside the man she tried to attack. Trapped beside the blanket she believed she deserved. Trapped beside the sister she tried to bully. She shook with rage, her breaths sharp and erratic, her knuckles white around the armrests. Her eyes flicked to the blanket again and again, each glance sharper, more crazed, more desperate. She couldn't move. She couldn't attack. She couldn't win. But people like her don't accept defeat. They plan revenge, even if it's reckless, even if it's dangerous, even if it risks every life on that plane. The descent was bumpy, small tremors shivering through the fuselage. Amy squeezed her blanket tightly, her breath shallow again. I reached out and held her hand without looking away from Karen. She stared straight ahead at first, her chest rising and falling in violent bursts. But then, just minutes before we touched the runway, she leaned toward me, her voice barely a whisper. "You're going to regret this." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise made by someone drowning in their own entitlement. I ignored her. But my muscles coiled, ready to block, ready to shield, ready for whatever final move she had left. The wheels screeched against the runway, the thud of landing echoing through the aircraft. Reverse thrusters roared, the plane shuddering as it slowed. And then the captain spoke again. "Ladies and gentlemen, Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Do not stand or open overhead bins. We have a situation requiring everyone to stay in place." The cabin went dead silent. Every passenger knew what that meant. The police were coming. Karen heard it too. Her body stiffened. Her breaths became shallow. Her eyes widened, not with guilt, not with fear of what she'd done, but with fear of what was about to happen to her. But entitlement isn't rational. It doesn't listen to rules. It doesn't accept consequences. And the moment the plane came to a complete stop, seatbelt sign still on, the jet bridge not even attached yet, Karen exploded out of her seat like the restraints had burned her. She unbuckled so violently the metal clacked against plastic. She stood, her entire body lunging across me toward Amy. "Give me that blanket!" she screamed, her voice raw with desperation and rage. She wasn't thinking. She wasn't planning. She was attacking. Full force, full speed, full insanity. But she never touched Amy. Because I was ready. My arm shot up instantly, blocking her body mid-lunge, and behind me, Ben Ford moved with military speed, grabbing Karen's shoulders from behind with a firm but controlled grip, stopping her momentum like she'd hit a steel wall. "That's enough," he growled, his voice low, steady, immovable. Karen writhed in his grip, snarling like an animal cornered. But she wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not when the aisle ahead of her had just filled with 2 uniformed police officers stepping into the cabin. Their presence was a wave of authority so strong the cabin seemed to inhale in silence. The first officer, a tall man with calm eyes, looked directly at Karen. "Ma'am," he said, his tone professional but unyielding, "we need you to come with us." And for the first time since the conflict began, Karen froze completely. Her rage didn't vanish, but it fractured under the weight of consequences she couldn't dodge. She sagged in Ben's grip, her breath shaking, her eyes darting frantically as if searching for someone, anyone who would rush to her defense. No one did. No one even looked sympathetic. Dozens of phones hung in the air like a jury of lenses capturing her downfall in perfect silence. The second officer stepped forward, retrieving her suitcase from the overhead bin. "Ma'am," he repeated, "you need to gather your belongings, now." Karen didn't speak. She didn't scream. She didn't argue. She just stared at the blanket one last time. One final, broken attempt to claim something she had never been entitled to. And then the officers guided her down the aisle, her head low, her body trembling, her expensive beige outfit rumpled and defeated. And the cabin let out a quiet, collective breath. The kind of breath people take when danger finally leaves the room. But this wasn't victory yet. Not until the aftermath unfolded. Not until statements were taken. Not until the truth was sealed into reports that would follow Karen long after this flight. Because actions in the sky don't end when the plane lands. They echo, they stick, they become part of official records. And Karen was about to learn that her final descent had only just begun. The moment Karen disappeared down the aisle between those officers, the cabin shifted. Not the plane itself, but the people inside it. The tension that had been gripping every row loosened like a fist finally opening. The hum of the engines faded into a calmer drone, and for the first time since we boarded, the air felt breathable. Amy exhaled into her blanket, her shoulders dropping, her voice barely above a whisper. "Is it over?" I squeezed her hand gently. "For us? Yeah. For her? It's just starting." She nodded slowly, letting the truth settle. There was no triumph in her face, just weary relief, the kind you only feel when fear finally stops clawing at your chest. The second officer remained on board. taking methodical notes as passengers lined up beside their seats to offer statements, video files, timestamps, and eyewitness accounts. It wasn't chaos. It was organized justice unfolding step by careful step. People who had kept quiet during the confrontation now spoke clearly, calmly, with the confidence of witnesses who knew their truth mattered. Mr. Pike stepped forward with the quiet dignity of a man who had seen enough nonsense in life to recognize a moment when truth needed to be recorded. "Officer," he said, "I have the full sequence. From the first complaint to the physical shove, it's all here." The officer nodded, reviewing the preview frame on his phone. "This is exactly what we need." Ben Ford, steady as a rock, gave his account with the precision of a seasoned soldier. No embellishments, no drama, just facts organized like tactical notes. The officer's pen scratched rapidly across the page as Ben spoke. When he finished, the man gave him a respectful nod. "Thank you, Master Sergeant." Ben corrected him softly. "Retired." The officer smiled. "Never really retired, sir." The brief moment of respect passed between them, like two professionals acknowledging each other's code. Then the officer turned to me. "Sir, I need your full statement." I recounted everything, from the first entitled demand for the blanket to the grab attempts, the shove, the water, the false accusations, and the final lunge. I kept my expression flat, my tone measured. Emotion wasn't required. Facts were enough. As I spoke, Amy sat silently beside me, her blanket pulled to her chest, her eyes fixed on some distant point, as if replaying the chaos in her mind. When I finished, the officer nodded. "Thank you. You stayed very composed, given the circumstances." I shrugged lightly. "My sister needed me to be." His expression softened. "Well, you protected her. That's clear from every witness I've spoken to." He knelt down next to Amy. "Ma'am, is there anything you want to add? Anything you think we should know?" Amy swallowed hard, and for a moment I thought she might stay silent. But then she lifted her chin. "She scared me," she said softly. "But I'm okay now." The officer nodded with genuine kindness. "You're safe. We'll make sure of it." When he stood, his notepad was filled, and the fate of Karen Lucan was sealed in ink and eyewitness truth. The plane finally released us to deplane. Instead of the usual rush, passengers moved slowly, letting us go ahead, offering quiet words of support as we passed. Some nodded, some spoke. Some just looked relieved it was over. The solidarity wasn't loud or performative. It was the shared exhale of strangers who had been trapped in a pressure cooker together and made it out intact. When we stepped into the jet bridge, the air felt cooler, sharper, almost cleansing. Waiting at the end of the bridge was Maya, arms folded lightly, her expression softer than I had seen it all flight. She walked toward us. "I wanted to make sure you two got out okay," she said. "And to tell you, you handled that better than most adults I've flown with in my career." I shook my head. "You were the one holding the line. You kept it from getting worse." She smiled, small but real. "That's my job. But you'd be surprised how many people make it harder instead of easy." She said gently. "You were incredibly brave." Amy blushed slightly, looking down. "I was scared." Maya nodded. "Being scared and staying calm anyway? That's what bravery actually is." She handed me a small slip of paper. "This is your incident reference number. If you need anything, copies of reports, follow-up statements, anything at all, you can contact the airline through this code." I took it and tucked it into my pocket. "What happens to her now?" Maya exhaled. "The airline will file an internal report. The captain files one with the FAA. She'll face fines. Likely a long-term ban from the airline. Possibly others. It depends on how the agencies classify it. Interference with flight crew is serious. She paused. And so is assaulting a passenger. Amy looked up. She really can't fly again? Maya shook her head. Not for a very long time. Maybe never on this airline. There was no gloating in her voice. Just the weight of truth. When we finally stepped into the terminal, the world felt enormous again. The carpet, the lights, the airport announcements, the rolling suitcases. It all felt strangely normal after the compressed chaos inside the plane. Amy walked quietly beside me, her blanket folded neatly under her arm like it had never been touched by fear or danger. But I saw the way her fingers curled around the edge of it, holding it a little tighter than usual. Trauma doesn't fade just because danger leaves the room. It sticks for a while. But she was upright, breathing, walking on her own 2 feet. That was victory. As we made our way toward baggage claim, Amy finally broke the silence. Her voice was small, but steady. You know, when you handed her that napkin earlier, I knew we were going to get through it. I laughed softly, the tension finally cracking enough to let humor in. Hey, our family might not be tall or athletic, but our petty instincts are undefeated. Amy grinned for the first time since boarding. Uncle Stephen and the Squirrel War? She asked. Exactly, I said. Wilson family tradition. We don't break under pressure. We break Karens with kindness. By the time we reached the escalators, the weight in her shoulders had lifted. The red blanket wasn't clutched in fear anymore. It was held with quiet pride. That blanket had survived an airborne war, and so had she. When we reached the bottom of the escalator, I heard footsteps behind us. Maya. She jogged up, slightly out of breath. One more thing, she said. I almost forgot. She handed Amy a small laminated card. It was a simple passenger courtesy acknowledgement, something flight attendants rarely hand out. It read, "For calm, courage, and cooperation during an onboard disturbance." Amy stared at it, stunned. For me? For you, Maya said. You earned it. Amy's eyes shimmered, not with fear this time, but something softer. Gratitude, confidence, healing. Maya gave her a gentle nod, then turned back towards the gate. Take care of each other, she said. Always, I replied. We stepped into the main concourse, bright, noisy, alive. The ordeal of row 14 was behind us. The fear was behind us. The rage was behind us. What remained was simple. We were safe. Amy had her blanket. Justice had done what justice does when truth stands tall and witnesses stand together. Karen Lucan had tried to take a comfort item from a girl who needed it more than anything. She had tried to assert power where she had none. She had tried to weaponize entitlement in a metal tube where it could do the most harm. And in the end, she walked away with fines, a police escort, a fractured reputation, and a long trail of digital evidence stamped with her own voice and actions. Amy walked away with peace, strength, and a story she didn't ask for, but survived anyway. I walked away with the knowledge that I had protected my sister when she needed it most, and that strangers, real, decent people, had stood with us. And Maya walked away having done her job with flawless authority, guarding her cabin with the kind of steady courage that keeps hundreds of people safe at 35,000 feet. As we headed toward the exit, Amy nudged me gently. Luke, she said. Yeah? She smiled. Let's never sit in row. Deal. We walked forward, leaving the echo of Karen's rage behind us, carrying nothing but our bags, our relief, and the bright red blanket that, despite everything, had stayed exactly where it belonged.